I am an associate with a company called Sound Options Group out of the state of Washington. My email is down there if you need. And so I answer this question for all of you. And you can see the PowerPoint okay, right? Everybody's good with this? Great. So my name really is Carlo Rossi, in case you're wondering. If that sounds like a wine, it is. My great grandfather started a winery here in Sonoma County called Italian Swiss Colony Wines back in 1881. And what I will tell you is I am proud to be on the consuming end of the family business. So that's just, we'll put that out there. But I always get that question. So yes, we are an old wine family. My background, and don't want to spend a great deal of time, I got 45 years in the field. I taught 3rd and 5th. I was a special ed teacher. I worked in the compliance department for CDE in their special ed compliance unit. I worked for many years as a parent advocate and trainer. And then the job of a lifetime was as the special education ombudsperson, independent advocate for the Sonoma County SELPA. Retired a year ago, loved my work and was fortunate to work with great people towards meeting the needs of kids. Just retired as after 25 years as an instructor at San Francisco State in their Department of Special Education, and recently joined the state of California as an alternative dispute resolution coach. And what we're doing today is really to take a look at looking at ways to analyze conflict and challenging conversation, and to offer you an opportunity to take a look at a different way of examining conversations and conflict. And then we're going to talk some strategies around structuring conversations that support shared learning, and then talk a little bit about some communication strategies. I don't expect you to get all of this because it can be a challenge. But what I do want you to know is that this can be a challenging conversation, can be hard to have. And this is really part of a 12-hour training that my colleague and I do for special education to work on with school staff. Now I can see there we are. So as we jump into this today, this is a framework I'm sure many of you are used to, the MTSS framework. And what we're really looking at is a framework to support having challenging conversations and recognizing that there are different tiers that allow us to engage in challenging conversations. So as we move through this work today, just think of this as a tier 1 approach to dealing with challenging conversations. And if any of you are interested, you or your districts, you can give me a holler or contact Jason and John, and I can turn you on to the training that my colleague and I do related to this work. So what we know about challenging conversations is we need to take a look at this as, what is our relationship to conflict? And as many of you are aware, we deal with conflict as educators, and I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I will say that from our research, most educators are conflict avoidant. Would that be accurate in terms of where you guys are today? I mean, would you see yourselves as conflict avoidant? Yes? Yeah. It's a hard deal. It's a hard thing to learn. And so as we move through this training, I want to acknowledge that conflict for many people is something we want to avoid. And we look at it in the work that I do with my colleagues as it's really an opportunity for us to start working effectively with our families. So, so as we do this, oh, there we are. As we do this work, I really want to share with you the idea that conflict is okay. And what is conflict? What are our crucial conversations that we talk about here? And here's what 3 authors from a wonderful book, and if you're looking for a terrific resource, Crucial Conversations, and it's by Patterson, Grenny, McMillan, and Switzler, and they identify crucial conversations as having these 3 components: opposing opinions, strong emotions, and high stakes. And certainly for the 40 years that I worked in special education, and I think education in general, this is kind of where we are, is, we're talking about conversations with either staff or certainly our families. They have strong emotions. I would hope that there are opposing opinions and thoughts about how to meet kids' needs, and that these conversations that take place literally are high stakes. There's nothing harder for a family to deal with than, and more important, and they're passionate about, than their kids. And what makes a conversation really hard is we have these components that kind of get in our way. I mean, you look at these and you go, wow, this can be hard. These conversations can really be difficult and challenging. And why? Because sometimes there's the perception of an incompatible difference or threat. So we don't want to talk to somebody necessarily. We avoid these conversations because sometimes it's like, oh God, I don't want to go there. There's a difference of opinion. And the issues that we typically address in these conversations are significant. You're talking to the parent of a child with special needs, a student in your schools. Those are issues of significance. And typically there are strong emotions. And when we've got strong emotions, I'll tell you, we tend to repel back. And we're going to talk a little bit later this morning about emotions. We feel strongly in our work that conversations are pivotal to collaborative relationships. And we know the research out of UCLA, University of Washington, that talks about it really is all about relationships. And what we see around these conversations oftentimes is it is kind of an approach avoidance kind of issue. And as Alexander's weighing in, especially as a superintendent, when angry parents are on the warpath, and there's just, it's like, oh my gosh, here we go. So when we look at these, what we recognize when we start looking at these kinds of conversations is that, and this came out of, any of you familiar with the work of Renee Brown? And Renee Brown is a researcher, a social worker. She's published a number of books, another great read if you are so interested. She was talking in her book, Daring Greatly, and she was talking about to a gentleman named Kevin Sirache, the CEO of Serious Materials, and who was Inc. Magazine's 2009 Entrepreneur of the Year. And he was asked, what is the most significant barrier to creativity and intervention? And he responded, I don't know if it has a name, but honestly, it's the fear of introducing an idea and being ridiculed, laughed at, or belittled. And if you're willing to subject yourself to that experience, and if you survive it, then it becomes the fear of failure and of being wrong. And I was always struck by that comment because it just, to me, is so indicative of where we are when we're in these crucial conversations and we're thinking about saying something, but we get stuck with that idea, and it's actually somewhat terrifying to say, I don't want to go through this and be laughed at, belittled. And I think that keeps us from allowing ourselves to move into a conversation that ultimately can support a child or a situation. So what's the fear? Let's talk about it. What's the fear? What's the fear of having this conversation? And I think the fear that we see oftentimes is, I don't want to hurt the other person. I don't want to hurt the other person. But there's another one that we may they're going to react by telling us something I don't want to hear. Another approach avoidance kind of thing. If I say something, I may end up damaging the relationship. And ultimately that relationship might change. So when we look at this idea of conversations, we have a lot of stuff going on in our heads. And what my colleague Greg and I notice is conflict typically appears at first between our ears. Okay. It's a hard one. So what I'm going to ask you to do just for a minute, we're not going to obviously go into dyads and talk a great deal about this, but I'd like you to just think about a situation where that you believe shaped the way that you currently relate to conflict. It could be a period of time in your life. It could be a situation that you were involved in. Anybody want to talk about that? Where your foundation of conflict came from, a situation, and how that shaped your relationship to conflict? Anybody want to toss one out that they think might? Yeah, Jason.
So not to go all the way back to the couch, I'm not laying down and asking for therapy here, but I grew up in a situation with a single mom and a grandmother who was also a single mother, and seeing how they interacted in conflict situations, either in their work life or personal life, really has framed it for me. And sometimes in a way that I had to acknowledge the fact that I could be overly reactionary in those situations because of what I saw as a kid.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Good. Anybody else want to share one? Again? No?
I'm kind of similar with Jason, growing up in a family that just avoided conflict and ran from it. And so I tend to do the same thing.
Yeah. It's really interesting how when you look at that, you realize how that shapes your situation and how you relate to conflict. We had a big Italian family, and what I realized, there was a saying that my father had, which was keep the peace. Just keep the peace. And I realized that for much of my early years in education and mediation work, I thought that was the goal. And through some mentors that I'll share with you today, I realized otherwise. Maureen, you had a comment.
I do. You and I must have shared a dad. But also when I started working as an administrator, I specifically remember interviewing a candidate for a position who told me, I was taught you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And I hired her.
Yeah. And it really is true that we have this and we carry it forward. So I don't want to dispel any experiences, but I do want to shed light on perhaps another way that we can look at it. Okay. So we want to take a look at what are the ingredients of a conflict, and we really start looking at this. And what we end up recognizing is that with conflict, there are some constants. And typically that involves two or more people who interact and perceive incompatible differences or threats. So what we do a lot of with school teams and staffs is we tear this conflict, we deconstruct conflict and start looking at it. So we have people who interact, they perceive incompatible differences or threats. And those threats could be resources, about resource management. It could be about needs. In special education, there is oftentimes conflict between parents and districts around debating what the needs of the student are. Or it could be values. Where are the values? What are the core values that we're seeing? And are there differences? And then what we notice is after we kind of deal with these things here and we perceiving these, we end up then behaving or responding. And what we notice is how we behave and we respond either escalates or de-escalates the conflict. And so when that happens, we hit this choice point right here. We hit this choice point when we're facing these kinds of situations and we go, oh, I've got a choice point here about how I'm going to behave and respond. And again, this process that I'm talking about here happens so quickly, as does this choice point. And what we find is this choice points oftentimes, and I think a couple of you responded in the chat, this becomes a place where we react as opposed to responding. some of the folks that I work with, when I was training school district staffs down, I do some work down in Riverside, and somebody was saying, okay, give me a strategy for how to not react. And literally as simple and as the simple answer is, you take a step back and you breathe. I mean, when confronted with some conflicts, we tend to react. Is like, take a step back and go, whoa, I need a minute to think. Because when you don't do that and you're reacting, you're coming from your reptilian brain, which doesn't do well at all. It means you're reacting and you're responding, you're reacting. And that's not a place where you're really making good cognitive decisions. So just remember this kind of choice point spot. And what we want to do is to examine a little bit the structures of conversation. And if you can change the structure of the conversation, you can change the nature of the relationship. And so what we look at here is a conversational structure. And again, I'm not going to get into too much theory around this, but every conversation has a structure that invites certain kind of responses and inhibits other kinds of responses. Okay. And we approach most difficult situations prepared to tell the person something that is important to us. And really the key to this, when you're going into a crucial conversation or a challenging conversation, is we have to prepare ourselves. And our favorite phrase is, you either choose the conversation you're going to have and the way you're going to have it, or it will choose you. So I'm going to ask you to just think for a minute in your minds of a challenging conversation that you think, well, that you know you have to have. So anybody want to share? Or just, I'm not even going to ask you to do it. Just think of a conversation that you know you need to have. And kind of think about what is it that is keeping you from having that conversation. Okay. What's getting in the way of you having that conversation? Just kind of give that, you may want to write it down. Having a little technical issue here. Let me see here. There we are. So think about the conversation. And what we know about conversational structure is it typically takes on one of two stances. And you may relate to this in the conversation that you either know you need to have or one that you are thinking about having. What we know, what we notice when we work with school staffs a lot is that a lot of people come from a telling stance. So I'm looking down here and I'm going to have a conversation with Gail, and I'm going to go in and have a conversation with Gail. And I think I know I have to have this conversation with Gail, and I'm going to tell Gail what it is I think she needs to hear. And really, that's not a conversation. You know, that's saying to Gail, sit down and listen, because I'm going to tell you some stuff. And what we notice about telling conversations is that there is judgment oftentimes included in those kinds of conversations. There's a certain amount of hubris, pompousness, righteousness. There's a pretense of, I'm having a conversation with Gail, and I'm doing this, and I'm right for doing this, and Gail will hear me. And then there is also, to some degree, a dismissiveness. Gail's listening to me, and this conversation is about what I'm telling Gail. And really what I encourage everybody to do when you're going into a conversation, and this could be with a parent, this could be with a staff member, this could be any conversation you're going into, is to not come from a telling stance, but is to come from a learning stance. And what we notice about a learning stance is it has these attributes. if you're really going into a conversation from a learning stance as opposed to a telling stance, I'm not judging. I'm coming in this with a great deal of curiosity. I'm coming into this with not a righteousness or hubris or arrogance. I'm coming into this saying, you know, Gail, we need to talk. And I'm hoping that this can be a two-way conversation. I'd like some information to share with you, and I'm hoping you will share back with me. I also want to say there's a presence. You're present in the meeting. Now, I'm going to tell you, after doing 40 years in education and well over 1,000 IEP meetings that I've either participated in mediation, or I've trained staff in, or I've sat in as a mediator facilitator, the presence piece is so important. I mean, I've been in IEP meetings where people have been on their phones. They're checking their email. They're writing notes down to each other. Or I'm looking and I'm thinking, you're not present. And the parent or somebody in that meeting knows that you're not really focused in a learning stance. And it is palpable when you do that. Also, there is an acknowledgement, you know, checking to make sure, checking for understanding. You know, Rachel says something in a meeting and I come back to Rachel and I go, you know, Rachel says it and I'm over here in my telling stance and it's like, okay, great. I kind of dismiss what Rachel says. Rachel may have said something and I'm going, wow, I'm really not sure about that. But again, I don't want to speak up because I might be embarrassed or somebody may put me down or somebody may say, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to go, you know, Rachel, I want to make sure that I understand what your position is. I think I understand, but could you restate it? I'm checking for my understanding. I can't tell you how often in meetings with families do I see when the parent is talking, everybody does this. Now, I'll just tell you, I categorize that as what I call the bobbing head syndrome, which really means, I'm not listening, but if I do this, it'll look like I'm listening and I'm really not processing. I'm just kind of like, okay, good. When really, in essence, there's an acknowledgement piece that says, can you give me a minute, Rachel? I want to make sure I get this. And maybe state back to Rachel, is this what you're saying? That loop of completing communication reinforces that you're in a learning stance. And from my perspective, it reinforces the relationship and it reinforces the fact that you are, in fact, extremely interested in what that person has to say. There is the part about it, and I'm sure many of you are going, yeah, great, Carlo, this is wonderful. I don't have time. And my response to that is, you don't have time not to. Because I've been in IEP meetings where we've done that bobbing head syndrome and the parent says, I'm not done, I need another 2 hours. And you're going, oh my God. Or the parent says, I disagree with you and I'm filing for due process and you're going to be with the turn. I mean, part of this is, there is not a quick way of building relationships by speeding through. And I know in our speed up of modern life, we want a quick fix. There isn't one. It's not taking the time, it's investing time in reinforcing a learning stance in the conversations that you need to have. Okay? Any questions on this? Comments? Their
A
hand
couple
up?
things in the chat, Carlo.
Good. Okay.
From Leah, reading an interesting book called Humble Inquiry, The Gentle Art of Asking Instead of Telling by Edgar Schein.
Yes.
Related to the concept. And Maureen chimed in with, help me understand maybe my most common request as an administrator.
I could not agree more. One is, yes, instead of, that's a wonderful resource. The book that Leah's read. And Maureen, that is such a beautiful statement. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those questions statements you can make and questions you can ask. I mean, what a wonderful way of saying, help me understand. My university students used to say, what's a question you can ask when you're with a family? And the first question that I think is just so lovely is, me about your child. I'm interested. Tell me about your child. I'm working with a group in San Luis Obispo next week, and we're doing a parent training, and the parents are doing we're doing a 2-hour training where the parents are writing up a student profile on their child to send to the IEP team. You know how education sends all these reports to the parent? I'm asking the parents to send reports to the district, and it's called, Tell Me About Your Child.
Carlo, if I may, everything that you've shared also is a great foundation for having conversations with staff.
Oh,
And anytime you're approaching something that you know has the potential of going sideways, I mean, just approaching any difficult conversation, regardless of the topic, from this foundational point is perfect.
well, and you know, Jason, it's interesting you say that, because what research seems to indicate is we go into those challenging meetings and we go in going, oh my God, I've got to have a meeting with Sierra. I'm going into this meeting with staff. Sierra's going into the meeting. And it's like, I don't know, I got to figure this out. And we put about 2 minutes or 10 minutes of work into this. I think I'm ready. Ronald Heifetz in his work talks about 70% of crucial conversations that turn out well, 70% of the work has been done prior to the conversation. It takes work. It takes an investment of time. People say, I can't spend the time. You're not spending the time. You're investing the time. And that absolutely ends up making a huge difference in the kind of work that you will do long-term in these conversations. So in a learning stance, you shift your orientation from certainty to curiosity. You know, as educators, I think, and I was always trained, I'm supposed to be a lifelong learner. It's my passion. I'm an educator. I'm concerned about the fact that our educators do not see a lifelong pattern of education. And if we're certain, then we're not curious. So I see the idea of shifting the orientation from certainty, I know, to curiosity. I see it from debate to exploration. Tell me more, Jason, about your point of view. Not dismissing it, but I'm going to explore this. From simplicity to complexity. We're going to talk in a little bit about technical solutions as opposed to adaptive solutions. This is education. This is not simple. It's complex. Therefore, it takes all of us working together to engage in conversations, always for the focus of meeting the needs of students. And it's, you know, we kind of get into this either or. And I think a lot of the either or comes from, oh my God, we've got to hurry up. I got to get a decision or a signature, or it's like, well, wait a minute. It's not an either or. We can get to both and. There's a couple of sayings. Individually intelligent people can collectively make stupid decisions from a shallow pool of understanding. And we really look at this from the point of view of one measure of a group's intelligence is the depth of the shared pool of meaning, is really saying to people, I want to better understand this before we make a decision. And that takes an investment of time to really get to a deeper pool of understanding and meaning. There's a wonderful gentleman, and if you haven't come across readings from Roland Barthes, Roland spent 60 years in education. He started a program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and he made an incredible quote that I just absolutely shifted my practice. He says, one incontrovertible finding emerges from a career spent working in and around schools. The nature of the relationships among the adults within a school has a greater influence on the character and quality of that school. And then get this, and on student accomplishment than anything else. And when I read that quote in and quickly dove into many of the works that he's done, I recognized that when you have effective working relationships amongst the adults on your sites that are open and honest and transparent and generous and kind, those attributes that are embraced and embodied in the adults that are working in your schools and on your site, they absolutely filter down and throughout the entire culture of that school. I have seen schools that work like that. I've worked with superintendents and special ed directors. Somebody once asked me, what are the attributes of the school districts that you don't ever have to work with, that don't have issues? And I talked to a superintendent colleague of mine and I said, gee, Wayne, what's up with that? Somebody said, gee, you and Carlo never have any issues. And Wayne just looked and said, we really work our tails off to meet the needs of our staff and our kids. And those attributes filter throughout the district when it's done and done well. And I'm not going to show a raise of hands, but I know schools where in fact the exact opposite of open, honest, transparent, and those kinds of attributes, the opposite, backstabbing and gossiping and disruptive and non-trusting, those tend to infiltrate the culture as well. So I think Roland's work is extremely important because this idea of imagine these qualities not only being present, but also the incredible impact that they have on student accomplishment. So, what we propose and suggest is that we look at, we kind of see a new way of seeing things. And this is the work that I was referring to earlier from Ronald Heifetz. So Heifetz has studied conflict for a great many years. And Heifetz came out and said, that there are really, in his book, Leadership Without Easy Answers. And it's an incredible resource for those of you that are doing the work in education that you're doing. And he really identifies a difference between technical work and adaptive work. And so Heifetz says technical work, our technical problems are those that in some sense, we already know how to respond to them. Okay, it's like, I'll give you a special ed example. A parent asked for a copy of their child's special ed records, and it's like, I want a copy of my child's special education file. And the technical answer to that is that the district has 5 calendar days from the date that they receive the parent's written request to provide the parents with a copy of their child's special ed file. Technical. How many days? How many days does the district have to convene an IEP meeting from the date the parent receives a written request? 30 calendar days, and there's technical answers that can be found in IDEA, the special ed law, and Title V, the California Education Code. Technical answers. Heifetz then says, but there is adaptive work. And the adaptive work is the problem definition is not clear-cut and technical fixes are not available. Learning is required to both define the problem and implement solutions. And I cannot tell you how important this clarity or this difference is when you start looking at the kind of work we do in education. So a technical issue that I've already addressed with you, special education, for instance. Violations of the behavior contracts and of the Ed Code, 48,900, suspensions. What are the suspendable suspensions? What can you suspend? A through E and all of that, technical answers. But in terms of education, and I'll take special education as an example, how many specialized academic instructional minutes does a student need who has a serious learning disability? Well, that's not a technical answer. I can't go to IDEA or the Title V and go, let's see, Jason has a learning disability. He's a 6th grader. He has visual processing disorder. Oh, the Ed Code says he gets 75 minutes a week. There's not a technical answer. So much of the work that we do in education it requires learning to determine both what's the concern and what's the solution. And that means all of us working together to figure that out. And I know you're all going, oh my God, it could take so much time. And the answer is, you're going to invest the time in meeting the needs of students, or as administrators, you have a staff issue. Okay, you need to sit down and learn, go deeper in terms of that shared pool of meaning. What do we got here? Fill me in. I need a larger scope. Crucial conversations. Karen and I need to have a conversation. I need to sit down with Karen and go, okay, Karen, I'm feeling the need for this conversation. And Karen may go, Carlo, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't need to have a conversation with you. And then Karen and I have to enter into a dialogue to say, let's talk about, and I want Karen to hear me about what my concerns are, and then I'm going to hear Karen back. You can't just go into this from a telling stance. As Heifetz says, learning is required when we go into these kinds of conversations. Okay? We good? Any chat, John, or questions from anybody? Comments?
Nothing new right now.
All righty. Anybody, any questions or comments about this as we move into conversational structure, or concerns or questions? Anybody?
I love the idea of the learning, working with fieldwork supervisors. They often have conversations about what's going on in a classroom. And I really like the idea about learning about the teachers and what they're doing and why they're doing it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. You know what I talk, as a kid, I loved tractors. I just loved, there was a thing I thought, gee, I just want to be a heavy equipment operator because I love tractors. And the backhoe was one that I always liked. And part of what I think we've got in the speed up of our modern life, and certainly with education, you all get it. Oh my God, it's like, hurry up. We have to catch the kids up. And I'm over here going, no. Slow down. Slow down, folks. This has been a train wreck. Our system's broken. We've been dealt something that no one's ever dealt with. We need to take a step back and slow down. And we need to dig. Kelly, like you say, we got to learn. We have to take time. Tell me what's going on. I love meetings where, for the most part, we structured an IEP meeting one time where we were in such a mess that I said, put your pens down. We're not taking any notes for the first half hour. Mom, Dad, tell us about your kid. And you need to hear the frustration and the angst and the anxiety. And once all of that's on the table, and listen, the emotion, it's not comfortable sometimes, but boy, if you don't acknowledge the emotion, game's over. Yeah, I did an IEP one time, and the parent was starting to cry, and everybody on the team was kind of frozen with the emotion. It was like, oh. And somebody leaned in and said to the mom, "Are you okay?" And I said, Mom's not okay. We're going to take a break. And you could see people were like, oh, we only have 2 hours. And I'm like, we can't move on. You can't go around emotion. You got to go through it. And so I think spending that time and investing that time and digging deeper is critically important. Any other comments or thoughts? Okay. So there's a wonderful book. I have it actually here on my desk. I'm reading it for a second time. Difficult Conversations, Stone, Patton, and Heen. And this came out of the Harvard Negotiation Project. And the book talks about conversational structure and how to discuss what matters most. And they really identify, when you start looking at conversations, kind of seeing the structure of difficult conversations. There's 3 conversations that typically go on. And there are the what happened conversation. And we can spend a lot of time on what happened. the what happened conversation is very seductive. It's a very, very seductive conversation. Let me tell you what happened. And then there's spins and Jen has her conversation about what happened. And then Sierra's got her conversation. Well, I saw it differently. And we could spend hours debating the what happened conversation. And then there's the feeling conversation, which is hard. Because I think a lot of us have not had the opportunity to work with the feelings. And boy, when those feelings come out, it can be paralyzing. Oh my God, there's anger, there's upset. And I will say this up front about the feeling conversation. As somebody who has been in this field for a really long time, I am hugely concerned about the tolerance that we have over the last, I'll say, 5-6 years, maybe more, of how the feeling conversation has translated into, I can say whatever it is I want to say, however I want to say it, and with anger and disrespect and insult. And it's kind of this, it's like, well, I have these feelings and I'm going to let them out. And I'm thinking, well, letting them out is one thing, but attacking and insulting is another. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But there's the feeling conversation. And then there's the identity conversation. This is about me. And I think if you start to look at conversational structure, they typically will fall into these three conversational structures. And really what it comes down to in the what happened conversation is we notice that difficult conversations are not truly about what, it's not about what's important. It's the conversation about what happened usually includes disagreement about what really happened, who's right and who's to blame. So I could be having a conversation with Rachel and Rachel's telling me and I'm over here and I already know, and it's like, I love this, the blah, blah, blah. It's like, yep, here it goes. Yep. Yeah. And Rachel's over here going, he's not listening. He's not processing anything. It's typically about, I disagree with you about what happened. And really this is about me being right and you being wrong. Hard conversations. The feeling conversation. We have an emotional response when stuff comes up. And it's not about the other person, it's about us. If I'm in a meeting with Rebecca and Rebecca and I are talking and I'm starting to get emotional and I'm looking at this and I'm going, whoa, what's up with me? Whoa, this is triggering something in me. So I'm going to ask, how do you guys know when you've been triggered emotionally? And believe me, there is a physiological indicator for you. Anybody want to cop to how you know you're starting to get emotionally heightened? Anyone?
I would say I can feel it in my stomach. Like I actually have a gut, when they say a gut reaction, I have a gut reaction.
Yeah, right? Who else?
My face turns red.
Yeah, right?
I feel like I want to leave the room.
Get me the hell out of here. Yeah, it's fascinating. I know for me, pulsating. Uh-oh. Heightened. One of my graduate students is like, oh my God, Carlo, when I'm emotional and I'm into that conflict situation, my voice goes up like, hi. It's like, you okay? Yeah. Or I want to escape. Get me out of here. We know that's going on. Fast heartbeat. My jaw clenches, chest tight, face red. Yeah. Jen saying panic. Oh my God. I mean, it's frightening. And by the way, when you're engaged in that emotional response, you can process absolutely nothing. I mean, zero. Now, those of you that work with teenagers or middle school students, and by the way, I've had 4 kids, 2 of my own 2 step kids, and I remember those conversations. I want to talk to you. I'm not talking to you. And I'm thinking, oh my God, You know, it's like having, it's like trying to have a rational conversation with a drunk person. Why would you do that? I mean, you know, I want to talk to you. I'm not talking to you. Sit down and talk to me. Here's the other one. Look me in the eyes. And I'm thinking, the reaction when you're under stress or emotional is you are not making eye contact. You're in church. I'm just going to study the tops of my shoes and pretend that I'm not. I want to get out. And when you're in that emotional response in that reptilian brain, research shows you're talking about somewhere between 10 and 12 minutes to get back to a heart rate that allows you a fully oxygenated brain and allows you to then process. So that emotional response is up because something's going on. And I will tell you, that feeling is the best source of information about what's most important. When Sierra says, I want to get out of here, is like, ooh, then that probably means there's a conversation that really needs to take place here. Perhaps not right now, but key into that piece of what's going on for me here that I want to avoid this, and take some time to take a look at that. Our failure to acknowledge and discuss feelings derails a startling number of difficult conversations. And as I tell people, you will have that difficult conversation at some point. You can have it with an attorney, you can have it with a mediator, you can have it with whoever you're going to have the conversation. But it's really when you don't acknowledge those emotions, the game's over. So what you need to do is to find the feelings that are lurking under there and talk about them. How do you do that? If I were in a meeting with Sierra and this stuff was coming up and I noticed my triggers and I could, you know, you're in meetings and you're going, ooh, something's going on here. I'm the one in meetings who goes, hey guys, I'm going to take a minute here. Something's going on here. And people are like, yeah, you know, it's okay to do that. Because when you don't, you're focused on the rumble and you're not able to process the content. And these are emotional meetings that we go into. It's really hard stuff. And what we want to do is hurry up. I got 2 hours. And it's like, no, slow down. We're going to work hard on this. And it's going to mean taking some time to do that. So this is another one of my favorite pieces in this workshop. And this is by a gentleman named Chris Argris, and he talks about the ladder of inference. And I think you will all keenly appreciate this as we go through it, because it identifies a process that we all do. It's not a bad thing, it's just what we do, around what happens when we engage somebody. So I'm going to pick on Rachel. She's in Sebastopol here with me. So Rachel and I get involved and we're in a conversation, or we've been in some kind of meeting, and I'm over here watching Rachel in this meeting, and I go, oh, I've got this observable data and this experience of Rachel. And so I'm there and I'm talking to Rachel and we're working together, and in my brain, I'm going, oh yeah, wow, Rachel, huh? That's interesting. And she's got a jacket on. Wow, it must be cold there. I don't know. And so I start seeing this data. And then with this data, I start selecting certain data. So I start selecting, and it goes on in my brain, and I go, oh yeah, that's Rachel. And gee, look at that. She nods her head at me a lot. She's not listening. I mean, you know, and again, the reason we do this is I add meaning to the data that I've selected from the observations that I've made. It has nothing to do with Rachel. This is all me. So I'm over here and I'm going, oh wow. Rachel's got her hand up here on her collar. That usually to me means Rachel's nervous. She must be nervous. And I've seen her, you know, and I add all this meaning. And what I will tell you is, Argus says, we are meaning-making machines. We make meaning out of everything. We do. Has nothing to do with Rachel or whatever I observe. It's all between my ears. I'm like, yeah, that means a lot. I got it now. And what we tend to do is we adopt beliefs and feelings about the situation of the person. So I've now had this, I've observed Rachel, I've selected certain data, I've added the data, and now I've adopted beliefs and feelings about Rachel. Oh, and by the way, I'm right, because it's me, it's all about me. And I'm over here and I go, yeah, that's perfect. I mean, it all makes sense to me. And then I take action based upon these beliefs and feelings. And somebody goes, oh, how's Rachel? And I go, oh my God, I wouldn't work with Rachel. She never pays attention during meetings because I've noticed that she nods her heads a lot and she doesn't listen. Well, I don't know crap about Rachel, but I've made these assumptions and taken action on these beliefs and feelings. And it's a reflective loop. Our beliefs influence the data we select when we find ourselves in similar circumstances. And we only select the data that supports our beliefs. It's a closed system. And how long do you think it takes us to do this? Seconds. This isn't like, oh, I'm going to take some time. It's like, yeah, I got Rachel figured out. I'm good. And then we take action. I will give you an example. I was teaching kids with autism down in San Francisco. We had a student in the school, Alonzo, and Alonzo was the identified troublemaker. And you all know what that kid's like. Everybody knows Alonzo, and Alonzo's the one. And so one of the teachers said, Alonzo is he's just acting out in my class. And they said, and I said, I could, and they go, the one neat thing about Alonzo is he loved little kids. And I go, God, I see him on the playground with our kids with autism. And I go, she goes, maybe he could come work in your classroom, kind of joking. And I go, that might be really cool. So we named Alonzo a little teacher, and we called him Little Teacher, and we got him a vest, like a colored vest with Little Teacher on the thing. And Alonzo kind of like strutted around, and he had his little vest on at recess. And now the other kids are coming up and they go, well, how come Alonzo gets to wear that vest? And I go, well, he's a little teacher, and we recognized him. He really works good with that. Well, I want a vest like that. And we're like, well, I don't know. We'll have to check with Alonzo. So Alonzo kind of began. But then there's a fire in the boys' bathroom one day. And the principal comes down to me and she goes, Carlo, there's been a fire. Where's Alonzo? And I go, oh, Alonzo's sick today. He's not in school. What I felt like saying was, must have been one of the other little darlings in the school because Alonzo's cool. But what had happened in this school is we had this ladder of inference. Alonzo was the bad kid. And we make these decisions not necessarily based on anything other than we support the data and select the data that supports our belief. So this again is one of those things that I think is so critically important in the work that we do. Family doesn't show up for a meeting. What are some of the assumptions that we might make that have a negative tone when a family doesn't show for a meeting with you at school? And be honest here. Knee-jerk reaction sometimes. Rachel, you got your hand up?
I do. I guess my question for you is, and I agree, is where does like the gut reaction or the gut where sometimes you have to make decisions based on, that intuition, how does that play out in this situation?
Trust your gut. Be careful about the decisions you make. So note, and I really say to people, trust your gut. Be careful about acting immediately on your gut. It's like, ooh, something's going on in a meeting. Ooh, I've got to sense something's going on. Consciously think about, ooh, hey guys, I need to take a break for a minute and check in with my team before I make a decision. But I think absolutely trusting your gut is important. Be careful about what we do after that before you make any kind of significant decision. Yes, Leah.
Yeah, going back to the other question you asked, it would be simple for us to think like, oh, that family doesn't care. But we have I mean, I catch myself doing that sometimes. And the thing is, we really have no clue. That family could have had an emergency. They may have had to bring another child to the emergency room. We don't know. So it's good to go more to the inquiry at that point instead of the assumption that the family doesn't care.
Well, yeah, and that's so true, Leah. And in our meetings with staff, I think we make assumptions all the time. You know, assumptions, positions, expectations. Assumptions are only confirmed once you examine them and talk about them. Well, I assumed, and it's like, well, where did that come from? Well, I just figured that. Assumptions are so insidious. And when we make those assumptions, we don't know, as Leah said, parent doesn't show up, car trouble. I was in a meeting, huge meeting, mediation, and the parent didn't show. And I am telling you, everybody was like, I'm done. I'm just done. And they go, what, Carlo, you're facilitating, what do we do? And I was like, what's going on? They go, well, the parent's not here. What do we do? Well, I go, anybody call the parent? Could somebody make a call? I hope everything's okay. Yeah, I guess we could call. Car breaks down, emergency with kids, childcare. My wife teaches at Sonoma State and Santa Rosa Junior College in early childhood leadership, and the childcare crisis throughout the country. Maybe childcare failed. Ever been in that situation? I mean, it's like, wow. So be careful about the assumptions that we make without checking them out.
Hey, Carlo, there was an interesting thing in the chat from Jen. In others, we tend to attribute things to their character, but when it comes to us, we tend to attribute things to the situation. For example, road rage. That person cut me off because they are a jerk. We blame the person's character. But when I cut someone off, it was an accident. We blame the situation.
And I was in a hurry.
Right.
Yeah. I live near a charter school here in Sebastopol, and I finally had to go to the head of the charter school and go, you know, I just need to, you're in my neighborhood. And she goes, oh, we're trying to be good neighbors. And I was like, I know, I need you to have a conversation with some of your parents about stop signs. And she was kind of looked at me, was like, stop signs? And I have noticed, and I walk every morning, is that they blow through stop signs on their way to school. And on one, I was in my car, almost got sideswiped by this person. I rolled down my window and the lady rolls her window down. She goes, what's the problem? I go, it's a stop sign. And she goes, my kids are late for school. And I wanted to go, oh, well then, of course, run the stops. I mean, so there's this part, you're right. We make these judgments. Here's the other one. In the idea of, if you see somebody, and I used to do this all the time, in a gigantic SUV, gigantic car that's, you know, the gas guzzler, and, you know, certainly here in the West County, we, you know, it's like, wow, we all have Priuses, and so I see these gigantic SUVs and I'm going, oh my God. And I used to, how could somebody drive one of those? You know, I mean, it's like gas guzzlers, and there's the judgment, there's the assumption. I used to laugh at myself. And my older brother drives a large SUV, and I was asking him one time, I go, hey, what's up with that? He goes, well, you remember I was in a massive car accident. And my therapist said, I don't know that how we're gonna work through this anxiety, but you need to drive a tank, because you're gonna be, and so it's like, oh, I never thought about the other side of the story. And I think in our speed up of modern life, we just don't take enough time to think about the other story. So yeah, this reflexive loop is an interesting look. We also get into what I call conflict stories. And when we are engaged with somebody that we are in a conflict with, we have conflict stories. And conflict stories are great because they become simple and fixed. Okay? I mean, if I have a conflict going on with Leah, I've already got it figured out. You know, I'm right, Leah's wrong. Here's the situation. And it becomes very simple for me because the conflict story is simple, it's fixed, and it's full of judgment and accusation. And it's woven into these characters. And it's one of those situations where I rehearse this conflict story and they're edited to fit my beliefs. And I see this a lot. We just engage in this situation a great deal where we rehash the conflict story over and over and over. And the conflict storyteller literally experiences the account as true, even in the face of data that says it's not accurate. I'm facilitating a large mediation over in the East Bay, and the attorney said, I did not ever say that. And you as and there's a whole story that he has about me as a facilitator. And it got into my identity a little bit. I was a little off kilter, and I said, whoa, okay, I'm feeling kind of threatened right now that you're confronting me this way. And I hear that you really are certain you didn't say it. I have a recording of the meeting where I've reviewed it. You said it. And his view was, no, I didn't, even in the face of the data. So the storyteller absolutely in a conflict story experiences it true. And there are some truths about the storyteller embedded within the story. And by the way, what we also notice about conflict stories is that we engage others in our story. So I've got a story going on about Rebecca, and then I've got this conflict story, and it's absolutely my story. And then I talk to Sierra and Rachel, and I tell them my conflict story, and I engage them in my story. I bring them in. It's like, hey, come on and join me. And then we start ganging up because we're all doing it. So again, just some information about what we oftentimes see when we deal with conflict and conflict stories. They become extremely seductive. And okay, I say stuff that I probably shouldn't, but those of you that know me, here I go. Where a lot of the conflict stories take place and the assumptions and this information, if you really want to hear a lot of it, try the teachers' lounges. I don't always hear extremely positive stuff in teachers' lounges. I hear a lot of conflict stories, and what I'm trying to do is to recruit people into my conflict story. So I won't go there anymore. So how do we do this? How do we get out of this? How do we avoid getting stuck in these kinds of things? Well, let me see here. Go back. Sorry about that. We want to take a look at preparation. Okay. I want to get into a preparation piece. Let me see if I can go back here. Yes. I want to start looking at 4 steps that you take that allow us to effectively deal with conflict and challenging conversations. And it really comes down to 4 steps: preparing to engage, convening the conversation, getting to a place of increasing shared understanding, and then moving from that kind of place of inquiry into what we call action. Okay. So preparation. And again, I know that there are pieces of this that you're going to go, oh my God, this takes so much time. It doesn't take a great deal of time, but 70% of the work that you do prior to the meeting will give you an opportunity to have a good, solid conversation. So there are components of satisfaction that we look at: substantive, procedural, and emotional. So we're going to take some time. Personal preparation. So if I'm going into a meeting with one of you, I'll pick on Kelly, and I'm going to go in and meet with Kelly, and Kelly and I have this meeting and this conversation we have to have, and I've got to go into this, and I'm not thinking about what Kelly's going to say. I'm preparing me. And when I prepare me, I want to start saying, okay, who am I going to be in this meeting? Who am I here to be? Am I the principal? Am I Kelly's friend? Am I her supervisor? Who am I? And how do I want to be in this meeting that's going to reflect who I am? I want to engage at integrity. Integrity is this word that I think is so easily thrown around, and yet not oftentimes comprehensively acted on. Integrity, where your actions are consistent with your words. Honesty and transparency. So I'm going to go into this meeting with Kelly, and I'm going to say, what do I really want? I really want to have this conversation with Kelly. What do I want for me? What do I want for Kelly? What do I want for this relationship? And how am I going to act if I really want that? In this book, Crucial Conversations, they talk about starting with heart. I want to have this meeting. I'm going to work really hard on going into this and being prepared. I'm going to refocus my brain and my heart, find my bearings and be clear and prepare for this meeting. Really, really important to be prepared. The substantive preparation. What are the issues? Do we know what the issues are? Kelly may come in and go, Carlo, this is great. What's up? And I go, come on, Kelly, you know. And Kelly goes, I don't have a clue why we're here. So if I'm going in for a crucial conversation, a challenging, I want to make sure I know what the issues are. And I've communicated that with the other party so they can be clear as well. This is not, I'm going to surprise you at a meeting. I look at special ed meetings. I go into some special ed meetings and we hand the parent a 20-page psych report on their child. And we go, hi, here's the report. And I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. If I handed you guys a report that was 20 pages on your kid, and I said, hi, we're going to discuss this at the meeting, you'd go, no. I'm not sitting here listening to this. I haven't had time to read this. I see school boards and committees. Somebody walks in and goes, I want you to consider this. And they go, whoa, no. We haven't had time. I don't want to patronize you by suggesting we're going to consider this when you hand it to me. We're going to need to reconvene so I can really know what's going on here. So you got to know what the issues are. You also want to know, what's your story about this? Yours. How do you feel about this? Are you clear? I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I feel about this. We're seeing it with, in personal situations where you have a family gathering. I've had friends who've had family weddings during the pandemic, and they're like, I don't know what to do. I've got family members who refuse to be vaccinated and are saying they won't come to the wedding if they have to wear a mask. Where am I with that? Where do I sit with that? What's my story? What are my interests? What are the issues? Got to be clear about that. If you're going into a meeting, what information do we need? How many times have we gone into meetings with parents and somebody says, well, how's his attendance? Oh, hold on, I'll be right back. I'll go print out the attendance. Oh, shoot, is discipline, shoot, I should have brought that up. Come on, be prepared. And then also, what are the options? What are our options based on where we are? I'm not going to get into BATNA, just so you know, the acronym BATNA is some work out of Rogers, a book that Rogers wrote on conflict. And BATNA is what is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement? And I'm not going to get into the specifics of that. But again, substantive preparation is so critically important if you're going to go in to have a conversation. And then there's the procedural. And this is one that I am concerned we don't pay enough attention to. So when we're looking at procedural preparation, mutual benefit, positive tone, and focus on safety. I mentioned it before, I'll say it again. I am hugely concerned about the tolerance we seem to have for disrespectful behavior around the table. I have been part of observing meetings in my own county, my little city, around the renaming and rebranding of our high school. And I will tell you, the very same people who talk about being enlightened and positive and focused have made statements publicly about our superintendent, who I love dearly. String her up, run her out of town. She doesn't care. And I'm thinking, what happened? Where is our common decency and respect? I've been in IEP meetings where I've ended the meeting. People yelling, you people are liars. Oh, one more time and I'll end the meeting. We're done. People at board meetings, I have a right to say what I want. Actually, no, you don't. But we've expanded, sadly, our tolerance for disrespectful behavior. And what I see is people are not sure how to stop it. And my thing is, I love resetting the tone to positivity. And if we can't, we'll end the meeting. But we need to give permission for people to realign a positive tone for our meetings and to keep the focus on the child. Logistics, time, location, participants. The logistics are critically important. Some of you that have done special ed, Maureen, you'll remember these IEP meetings where we used to do them in the kindergarten classroom and have to sit in those little tiny chairs. And I'm thinking, I'll get down into the chair, but I may never get up. In rooms that are not well air conditioned or have a good airflow and lighting and that kind of thing. I laugh because in very tense, contentious mediations, one of my silly strategies is when we've had ongoing mediations one after another. Have you ever had those situations where you walk into a room and it's the same family and it's the same room, and you literally start walking into the room and you go, oh, we're back. I think rooms have feelings, rooms carry emotion. Change the room. You know who always has really good rooms? Go to the boardroom and have the meeting in the boardroom. They always have great chairs, good light, good table space. But again, somewhat tongue in cheek and somewhat not is, listen, set an environment for a conversation that is logistically safe and sound and comfortable. The other one for logistics, and I always, people always said, oh, Carlo, parents used to say, oh, you went to Carlo's parent training. Did he say to bring snacks? And my answer is yes. Bring snacks if your parents to school meetings. These folks have been in buildings for all day long. Bring chocolate. I think chocolate's good. Bring Carlo Rossi wine. No, don't. But again, the idea of set up a meeting that reflects the significance and importance of what you're doing. And then the conditions for the meeting, the pre-conversation and conversation. Do I need to talk to Sierra about the conversation that we're having? I may have to have a conversation with Sierra about having the conversation. I'm having a meeting this afternoon with an attorney for a meeting we're having tomorrow, because I need to clear the air with him about how we're going to have the conversation tomorrow. Clarifying we're not tolerating disrespectful behavior and interruptions. So sometimes we need to do that to have a conversation about the conversation. When you convene the conversation, we create a context of shared expectation. What are we doing here? What are the expectations? Why are we here? We're always here. I always reset my meetings on, we're here to focus on the needs of Andre. We're all here. We may disagree, but the focus is on the child. I really always want to introduce the idea that when we have issues, we're going to balance advocacy. Parent has advocacy on behalf of their child with inquiry. Tell me, district, what it is you're proposing for my child. I really want to better understand. District says, I want to balance advocacy. We have a good program here for your child. I want to inquire. We call it appreciative inquiry. I want to inquire about what it is you feel your child needs and how we can bring that together. Exchanging information. No surprises. Sonoma County SELPA had for years a value of no surprises at meetings, no secret witness, no secret evaluation. Aha, here. No, come on. We're better than that. And then we want to make sure that we turn the focus to future. A lot of meetings. Let me tell you the story. Let me tell you what happened in second grade. I keenly appreciate you've had a rough history. He's in middle school, and we really need to focus on the future. So in convening the conversation, we want to move in that direction. And then agree. And listen, sometimes we can't agree, and that's okay. Sometimes I don't love drawing lines, but sometimes I will draw lines and have to say, this is the third IEP meeting we've had. I think we've discussed this a great deal. We clearly have a difference of opinion, and that's okay. There's another venue for us to have a further conversation about this. But what I see is a lot of times, if we can agree on agendas and we can agree on substantive information, we're good. But sometimes we can't always agree on the end result, and that's okay too. So there's active listening. Again, active listening so critically important. Why? It lets us know that you're listening. It really clarifies, I'm here for you. I hear you. Doesn't mean I agree. I had a superintendent one time, one-to-one aid for the child. Parent wanted a 6-hour one-to-one dedicated aid for the child. Real clear about that. And the comment to the staff was, do not raise that issue during the meeting. We don't do that. And it was like, whoa, wait a minute. And when we probed it with him, his comment was, if we talk about it, we have to do it. No, you don't. You can talk about it. I want to clarify the intent. I need to explore why this is. I also think when you are engaged in real active listening, it tends to diffuse the emotion. Other parties sit there, goes, God, they're listening, that's cool. And it slows the process down. And again, I've included some key elements there for you. Attending, responding, encouraging, restating, reflecting, reframing. Some of you know those strategies. And again, in our training that we do with staff, we take people through this. But I just think it's critically important that we listen. And then we look at, well, how do you share your perspective with people? What do you say? You share your observation and your data, and you talk respectively. You share your conclusions, but you suspend judgment. You ask for their perspective, and you listen for understanding. And then you explore it together. Doesn't mean you're going to always agree, but you've invested time. I want to hear what you have to say. And I need you to talk respectively. I need you to share what our conclusions are. And even though I may not agree with you, I'm suspending judgment. I'm going to ask for other people around the table to weigh in, and I want to listen for understanding. Really one of those skills that I think we don't do enough of. And we really want to get to increased shared understanding. I really want to understand the depth of the need. I want to really search for interests, shared interests. We may disagree about the approach, but we care here about your child. Yes, there are divergent opinions. I hope so. There's a wonderful quote by a gentleman named Richard Sherman. And Richard Sherman wrote a book about conflict. And Sherman's comment was, embedded in every complaint is a request. I just love that, because we get stuck in the complaint. Oh my God, they're always complaining. I hear the complaint. What's the request? I hear that you're upset, and I get that. And I've heard your story about what's going on. What's your request? The seductive nature of a complaint typically overrides getting to what the question is. I respect and understand the complaint, but I really want to know what the question is. What's your request? What are you asking for? What do you feel we can do to address this issue? So again, balancing advocacy with inquiry and getting to dialogue. I see far too much of us taking that, what we've referred to earlier this morning, as of a telling stance, and engaging in dialogue for a learning stance. And it is a significant shift for us to go through. And no, it's not Richard Sherman, the Buccaneers quarterback. Thank you for that. So yeah, you guys, and I want to say, I've been doing this for 40 years. I still do the mistakes. I still make it's like, but I catch myself going, oh, Carlo, you're not listening. And sometimes I will say, boy, I'm not sure I call all that. Can we go back? I want to really make sure I understand what it was you're saying. Write it down. I got to tell you, the questions that I see us dealing with. Think of a question that you've used in your work once or regularly that you believe has a useful impact. So what kind of questions? I mean, Maureen, you mentioned yours. You had a statement that you always make. Anybody else talk about questions? What's a question that you love to ask that invites inquiry, that causes people to reflect? Anybody have a question? Yeah, Sierra?
When I started teaching years ago, I was having some problems with classroom management. I was teaching 6th grade, and I'm like, what? And someone said to me, everyone has a perfectly good reason for everything they do. You just need to figure out what it is. And it was said in the context of that, right? And that no kid is out to make your day miserable. This isn't about you, it's about them and what they need. And it has worked so wonderfully in every facet of my life, personal, professional, everything, because I start every interaction with, okay, why, they have a good reason. It doesn't mean their behavior is okay. It doesn't mean that we're just gonna let this go, but there is a reason. Yeah. And I think it just goes miles in getting to where we all want to be in a situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Why would a perfectly reasonable person do this? The student didn't wake up in the morning and go, oh, what a good day to go screw up Sierra's class today. There's a rationale, there's a reason. Who else? Anybody else? Comments, questions that you've used that open up that kind of inquiry or broaden that perspective? Anybody?
I just have a very simple, can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Anyone else? Question you might ask to invite further information or clarification.
I have another one I got, I've been using lately is from like, I think I got it from Glennon Doyle, but it's, you know, what would, she is using it in reference to like, what would it look like to be loved? Like if you're somebody who's looking to be loved or something, so what does that look like? What does that feel like? So that's what I try to do when I talk to my teachers or students in the classroom. What would this look or feel like if it felt better? Like, what would that look like to feel better? What would it look like for this to feel successful? What, you know, what are the things that you see or feel in the positive vision of seeing or feeling what you want to see or feel? What are the components? And then we can work on getting there.
Yeah. I love Maureen put in the chat, every behavior is communication. You know, it's like, I mean, I always looked at kids' behavior, and I was, you know, when I did a lot of the behavior stuff, it was like I'd go in and again, the nature of, I want to tell you what he was doing. And I'm like, well, I'm interested in you describing what you observed. But when I see behavior, I see it, and Maureen, you said it beautifully, is I see waving a red flag saying, help me. What's going on right now ain't working. I need something different. I get it. It's not always pretty, but they didn't wake up to screw up your day. Something's going on. And that waving of the red flag, if you can look at it and go, oh, we're missing something here. Something's going on. So yeah, beautifully said, you guys. And that to me is, it also, when you do that, it engages in a relationship that starts building trust. We may not agree, but oh my God, you're listening. Thank you. I think it makes those crucial conversations much easier if you come from that kind of learning stance as opposed to a telling stance. What we ask, how we ask it, the spirit within which we ask, all invites certain responses and discourages others. I love the comments sometimes. So I'm sure you have a question. I'm thinking, that's not exactly a way to invite further questions. You know, it's like genuine request, genuine questions. The very act of asking questions influences people. Acts of asking and answering alter experiences and generate experiences. I love that. Can you tell me more? I'm not sure I'm getting that, but man, I really want to. Let's keep talking. Questions have the power to shape meaning and restrict or expand the possibilities. And I know there's times when it's like, you want to expand? I don't have time to expand. And my response is, we don't have time not to. We call it intentional inquiry. It's intentional and purposeful. And I'm going to say this, if you're not interested in doing it, don't bother. Because if it's phony and it's fake, it's felt as phony and fake. Hi, I'm just going to check the box that I asked the question. No, don't. It really needs to be born of genuine curiosity.
Can I add?
Go ahead.
Sorry.
No, please.
Because I've been thinking about this the whole time, like, okay, it has to be, because we all know there's nothing worse, especially as a parent, of walking into a 504 or an IEP, and you know they're trying to steer you, and they're using all of those things where they're asking, and they're using all the things you're talking about, but we know.
You know.
I was just kind of going over that in my head and thinking about the slide where you're preparing yourself for that meeting.
Right.
And thinking about that was by just saying, like, I took a picture of that. I'm going to look at that every day, because I think even though a lot of us probably practice a lot of the things we've talked about today, we do often go into these conversations with our desired outcome.
Yes.
And for me, I think that's what I'm really going to be working on is looking at that slide and going, okay, this, I need to really check myself as how am I coming in here? Yes, I can come in and I can appear to be this and appear to be that, but am I trying to get somewhere with it? And if I am, maybe I need to take a step back again before we have this conversation.
Yeah.
So it just brings me to a whole different level of thought and inquiry. So I'm really appreciative that that's been really great. I forgot what I originally started saying and why I started talking about being genuine. It's just so important. It's just so important. So thank you for addressing that.
Well, and Sarah, I'll dovetail off your comments. I've been in those meetings where you've walked in and you are the parent, you know, that parent wants a 504 and they want a list of accommodations for whatever and if you're prepared for that and you know, you go through the process. I've heard people say, oh, for God's sake, Sarah, just give them the 504. And I'm like, no, don't. If you in your heart of hearts feel like you have an appropriate program that's meeting the students' needs, we don't just throw these things out. Here's the other part of that. When we engage in that kind of, I'll just, never mind, I'll talk, you reinforce the behavior that they can do that anytime. I mean, I think it is appropriate to draw lines and say, I hear you. And we, at this point in time, the district disagrees. And that's okay. I mean, there are times as a mediator when I can't, you know, complete the mediation and I feel like I've personally failed and I have to check myself and go, wait a minute, did I do what I need? But there are times, but taking that step back and going, how am I coming into this meeting? And during the meeting, did I shift my perspective and go, oh, I learned some new information that I need to think about before I make that decision?
Yeah, I was thinking of adding maybe a reflection time after the meeting to go back to the original questions and go, okay, how did I show up here? And then moving forward, what have I learned about this person? Just anyway.
Good idea. Yeah, Jen.
Just to add, you started to answer some of what I was thinking. But I think one of my biggest struggles when I go to into a meeting where you have this space for the interchanging conversation. And during that time, you do start to shift your belief. The part that I struggle with is when do you just say, okay, we need to reconvene, have some reflection time, come back again, and when can you actually wrap up a meeting? Because there's that timeliness that happens in a school district where you only have so much time. So that's the part that I think is you have to gain with experience, but would love your reflection on that.
Sure. So I think it's absolutely and critically important to recognize process, but also to be given permission to say, we're not in a place where continuing ultimately supports and serves meeting the needs of the student here. So ending a meeting and saying, and in that situation, Jen, and what I will say to all of you is, that is where you kind of trust your gut and you have to go, this meeting is going south. Is that what you're referring to when the meeting is kind of, you're going, how do I stop it?
Yeah, or maybe even where it's stalled. You don't know what the next step is after gathering all of the information.
Right. So one of the things I would say, and I did this with one of our local districts when I was practicing, was we were stuck. I mean, we were in an IEP meeting and we were just dead stuck. And I was thinking, and I'm going, wow, thinking to myself as the facilitator, we're stuck. So I said to the team, I'm feeling really stuck. And they were like, yeah, God, we're stuck. And I was like, my suggestion would be, we can take a half hour and talk about it, or we can take some time and reconvene when people have had, and people were grateful. I think, you know, we oftentimes talk about giving to our kids the gift of time. Oh, just, you know, give them extended time. I think we need to allow that for ourselves and our teams. And I know we have pressures and timelines, but I think if you take time and go, we're going to give ourselves the gift of time to come back and reconvene and really think about this, I ultimately think you make a much better, sounder decision if you take the time and come back than just saying, look, we got to make a decision here. I'm not sure that the time pressure, well, I am sure. Time pressures typically don't end up with a result of a solid, well thought out decision. So absolutely trust your gut. If, boy, we're stuck, I think we need to really think about this and talk about this, and then come back and maybe assign some responsibilities and duties to other people. In terms of the end all, I can't tell you how often I encourage school districts to literally get to a point of saying, we've met, we're not going to meet, meeting again does not seem appropriate. We've made our offer. We've decided that doesn't qualify for a 504 meeting. We've decided your child is not eligible, or here's our offer of special education. We're done. And I know people are kind of uncomfortable getting to that place, but I absolutely reinforce the idea of, we're not going to have another meeting to just rehash the same old stuff. We're done. And we'll send it to dispute resolution. We'll file for whatever. I encourage that, because that to me expedites a process to ultimately do what? Meet the needs of the child. And I've got a meeting now. The parent canceled the IEP meeting on Monday that I was facilitating. The student's graduating in June. I don't know what we've got a couple of months left. And I think I know what the deal is, but part of this is we got to continue to focus on meeting kids' needs and balancing that advocacy with inquiry. Okay, other comments? Intentional inquiry, I think, is extremely important. Good questions, and we don't need to spend a great deal of time, but there's a bunch of different kinds of questions, and in the work that I do, the trainings we do with staff, we go through each of these, and the real issues here are, is the question likely to stimulate fresh thinking? Do I have my own answer in mind? And or are there assumptions embedded in the questions that I'm asking? So I really think it's important to work on asking really solid questions that are either broadening, clarifying, explaining, challenging. What if we did this? Literally brainstorming questions. I mean, I hear people say, well, let's brainstorm, but they're really not interested in brainstorming. They're interested in, so again, this intentional inquiry is so critically important. And then we get from inquiry to action. We want to develop options, sit down in these meetings, whether it's with staff or, union negotiations that my colleague and I engage in. What are the options? We want to evaluate each option. What does it mean? We want to select the best option that is based on mutual interest, mutual gain. And then we finalize a durable and resolution with a great deal of specificity. And I want to just address that. I've been to so many meetings where it's like, oh, good, well, we're good. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. And they, it's kind of like the parking lot conversations. Hey, I'll call you and then we'll set up another meeting. It's like, no. Specificity. We reach this agreement. Who's going to talk to who? We have an IEP meeting with new accommodations for the student. Who's talking to the student? Who's talking to staff? We're now going to include this child in math and history classes. Who's doing that? And when are you doing it? And who's doing it? That specificity around getting to durable resolutions and finalizing what we have. Good decisions are made. I'm not sure that we always consciously finalize the decisions we've made with the who, what, when, where, how, and then what if. And that's a critical piece. So I guess, part of it is, and a couple of you have commented, the idea around this morning is, what are we going to do with this information? Does it resonate with you? Are there certain insights, kind of, I always call them my aha moments? And then, is there new action that you think you might be interested in taking around this to help implement some new learning or some additional insight? I just, again, suggest that you take a look at that with the information we've discussed. I do want to say that, I'm certainly available. I love Sonoma County. My family's been here for 130 years, and I take a great deal of pride in the work that we do and the colleagues that, you're all sitting in front of me that make a difference for kids. Happy to help in any way that I can. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with Maureen and previously, and with John at the SELPA and Jason. And if there's anything that I can do to support you guys in working with kids and taking this information to you or your staffs, please don't hesitate to let me know. John and Jason know how to get a hold of me.